Yeah,
Good evening, everyone. If you're partying in the room, please take your seats and put your voting cards in. We're still quite short of quorum. Parties, I'm still looking for everyone to sit down so we can get quorum. I'm still several parties short. Parties, I see lots of you here. I just had a reminder to remind you, because I know that we have people in from Committee 1, to double check that the card that's in your machine is the Committee 2 card. If you could double check.
Good evening, everyone. Just a quick announcement while we're waiting to achieve quorum. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, there will be an Asia regional meeting in ISMO 1. So for the parties from the Asia region, please note there will be a regional meeting in ISMO 1 at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Thank you, everyone. We have quorum, so we can get started. So I proposed at the end of the last session that we would recommence our discussion of document 14 on livelihoods with the parties who had requested the floor before we ended to have our evening break. So to make things a bit more parties just, I'm going to give you some instructions, so please release your buttons. Anyone who's pressed your button, I'm going to ask the parties who were on my list beforehand to press their buttons. I'm going to give you some instructions. I'm going to ask the parties who I list to press their buttons so I can have them in the same order I had them before, which I think is a fair approach because I dismissed everyone for dinner. So I will ask parties in this order to press your buttons, please. Kenya, United States of America, Democratic Republic of Congo, United Republic of Tanzania, Botswana, South Africa. Okay, those are the parties I will start with. So Kenya, you have the floor.
Where's the... Yeah. I see. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, sorry for delaying with our intervention. We had raised our flag before the break. Madam Chair, we wanted to align ourselves with the comment from Israel that it's our conviction that decisions 18.33 to 18.35 has been fulfilled, and therefore we consider that the renewal of the working group is unnecessary at this stage. Madam Chair, if the COP will consider that the works will continue, then we'll have some amendments to make to the proposed decision. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Kenya. United States of America, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United States supports the revised decisions combining elements of the decisions into Decision 18.35. We note the draft guidance document in Annex 3 and support providing parties with more time to review and comment on the draft during the next intersessional period, as provided in the draft decisions. The United States intends to participate in the Standing Committee working group envisioned under the draft decisions and will review the report and make comments as appropriate. We are concerned about the implications of the proposed work in this document on the Secretariat's staff time as well as the higher costs noted in the budget section. However, we cautiously support the work in the interest of supporting the livelihood issues, noting the potential impact on the Secretariat. While we support efforts to share best practices and successful examples, we continue to maintain our view that livelihoods issues are best addressed at the national level, consistent with Resolution COP 16.6 Rev COP 18. The United States is very supportive of sustainable use of CITES-listed species, benefiting rural communities, and the alligator harvest program has both successfully and has been both successful and valuable to the local coastal communities throughout the southeastern United States. The state of Louisiana alone accounts for 3/4 of the industry. An impact study released in 2022 revealed that the industry created approximately 270 direct full-time or part-time jobs with a direct contribution of $103 million. The indirect employment assisted in additional 717 individuals, which earned an additional $174 million. The total direct and indirect impact was an estimated 988 jobs and $277 million. Most importantly, it is that a significant number of those impacted by the industry are lower-income individuals of the Cajun community, where alligator harvest is also culturally important to the Cajuns. During the rash of the hurricanes in coastal Louisiana and Texas in recent years, many in the Cajun community lost everything and would have had no income stream except for their ability to harvest alligators and collect alligator legs. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, United States of America. I see the United Republic of Tanzania. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. The United Republic of Tanzania supports the draft decision proposed by the Secretariat. We wish to state that local communities, especially those that live with wildlife, are affected when listing some of species in CITES appendices removes incentives for managing wildlife on their land. Madam Chairperson, it is important to note that the cost of living with wildlife is on the increase to communities. In Tanzania, for example, over the last 5 years, 50,000 hectares of crops have been raided by elephants, and in this case, causing food insecurity to local communities. We therefore support the renewal of this decision and extending the mandate of the intersessional working group for addressing livelihood issues. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you, United Republic of Tanzania. Botswana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Botswana would wish to commend the work done by the Working Group on Livelihoods under the able leadership of Peru and agree that the Working Group mandate should be extended in the intersessional period. We encourage the two working groups on livelihoods and on engagement with IPLCs to work in synergy. We are in support of the draft decisions contained in Annex 1 of Document 14 and look forward to participating in the work of the working group. Thank you.
Thank you, Botswana. I have South Africa. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. South Africa supports Doc 14 as presented by the Standing Committee, as this is a continuation of the critical work during CoP19 in Johannesburg in 2016, where livelihoods issues feature strongly on the agenda, with discussions focusing on how well-regulated wildlife can benefit local communities and species. As a result, South African communities have agreed that their land can be managed for conservation in perpetuity. South Africa supports the recommendations as amended by the Secretariat in Annex 1. In conclusion, Chair, South Africa would like to invite parties to a side event on the afternoon of the 21st of November, where we will be showcasing some case studies that demonstrate how sustainable use of CITES-listed species contributes to livelihoods of indigenous people and local communities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. So I will continue to take a few more parties. I see that Gabon has asked for the floor, so I will give the floor to Gabon. You have the floor.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Le Gabon s'aligne avec Israël et avec le Kenya et considère que ces décisions ne devraient pas être renouvelées. Toutefois, si ce comité décidait de renouveler ces décisions, nous aurons également des amendements à apporter dans l'intérêt de trouver un terrain d'entente et dans un esprit de flexibilité et de consensus. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Gabon. I see Japan. Japan, you have the floor.
Chair, Japan appreciates the work done by the working group on livelihood, also the guidance, members of the IUCN Sustainable Youth and Livelihood Specialist Group, as well as the Secretariat. Japan supports to adopt the revised decision contained in Annex 1 to the present document, and the delete decision 1837 and 1836, whose provisions have been incorporated into decision 1835, CoP19, as recommended in the CoP19 Doc 14. Madam Chair, Japan underlines the fact that the implementation CITES is better achieved with the engagement of rural communities, especially those that are dependent on the CITES-listed species for their livelihood. The recommended revised decisions outline the actions necessary to materialize and finalize the ongoing work to distill guidelines from case studies and raise awareness of and promote best practice in CITES implementation. And the livelihood includes its contribution to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These activities are in line with the CITES strategic vision. As such, Japan believes that the work on the CITES and the livelihood should be continued. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Japan. I see Namibia and then the plurinational state of Bolivia. Namibia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the floor. Namibia thanks the Standing Committee for submitting the document before us. We also thank Peru as the chair of the Standing Committee Intersessional Working Group on CITES and Livelihoods for the remarkable progress made by this working group thus far. We also thank the Secretariat for the implementation of Decision 18.35 to 37. Chair, decisions taken at CITES meetings impact on the livelihood of our local communities, and we therefore support the renewal of the mandate of this important working group. Having said that, Chair, Namibia supports the draft decisions contained in Annex 1 of the document. I thank you.
Thank you, Namibia. Bolivia, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Primero agradecer al pueblo de Panamá por su recepción y calidez y al mismo tiempo desearle lo mejor para su presidencia. El Estado Plurinacional de Bolivia saluda con gratitud y espera que se continúen las discusiones sobre cómo la CITES involucra aún más a los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales en la gestión y conservación de la vida silvestre a nivel nacional, a través de la aplicación de las CITES. En ese sentido, el análisis de la información sobre los impactos positivos, negativos y los potencialmente neutrales en su implementación sobre los medios de vida de los apéndices de CITES sobre los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales es altamente saludable. Observamos que, además de los potenciales beneficios tangibles como son los económicos, así como los intangibles sobre los medios de subsistencia que pueden derivarse de la aplicación efectiva de las CITES y de la legislación nacional, existe un riesgo importante de perjudicar los medios de subsistencia locales si el aprovechamiento y el comercio de especies silvestres son ilegales o insostenibles. Así también, si los criterios de implementación de los apéndices son técnica y operativamente complejos de implementar. En este contexto, hay que tener en cuenta que siempre hay un beneficio económico en el comercio, por definición, pero rara vez llega de forma significativa y equitativa a los pueblos y a los IPLCs. En referencia al documento de análisis, Bolivia recomienda apoyar los proyectos de decisión del anexo 1 de este documento, con algunas modificaciones. El párrafo A del proyecto de decisión 18.33 cita: recopilar o realizar nuevos casos de estudio, utilizando el modelo normalizado sobre la forma en que la participación de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales que conviven con la fauna y flora silvestres en el comercio de especies incluidas en el apéndice CITES contribuyen a sus medios de subsistencia y la conservación de las especies en el medio silvestre, incluyendo en ejemplos de apoyo al respecto de autoridades relacionadas con la fauna y la flora silvestres y otros interesados directos y presentados a la Secretaría. Bajo este contexto, sugerimos que estos estudios de caso demuestren el impacto de aprovechamiento de las especies incluidas en los apéndices de las CITES, tanto en los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales, así como en la conservación de las especies. El texto, tal como está redactado, daría la impresión que asume que todo el aprovechamiento es sostenible, que todo el aprovechamiento sostenible beneficia a los medios de vida de los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales, o que todo aprovechamiento genera beneficios para la conservación, lo que en algunos casos no necesariamente es así. Por lo tanto, el presente texto puede excluir la inclusión de estudios de caso en los que el bienestar o los medios de vida de los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales no se beneficiaron. Que los beneficios no fueron equitativos o que hubo beneficios para los medios de vida, pero el estado de conservación de las especies siguió disminuyendo. Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you. Plurinational State of Bolivia. Indonesia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Indonesia support the recommendation on COP14 submitted by Standing Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Indonesia. And I see Zimbabwe, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Zimbabwe would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing this document and acknowledge the remarkable progress made by the working group under the leadership of Peru. We support the draft decision to renew the mandate of this working group on an important matter that Zimbabwe believes is critical for the conservation of endangered species in international trade. I submit, Chair.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. Liberia, you have the floor.
This being the first time Liberia is speaking, Liberia would like to express its appreciation to the people of Panama, and then also congratulate you, Madam Chair, on your appointment as chair of this committee. It is important to acknowledge the place of local communities in implementation of CITES. These people are very important in managing natural resources. So Liberia would like to align ourselves with the previous speakers in supporting the draft document. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Liberia. I'm going to close my list now. I have two more parties. I'm going to take Zambia and then Guinea, and then I'd like to hear from some observers, but I think we're starting to hear the general consensus in the room, so we'll hear from these final two parties and then consider how to move forward. So Zambia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Zambia would like to add its voice to the list of parties that have called for the decision to extend the mandate of the working group. Thank you.
Thank you, Zambia. Guinea, you did ask for the floor. Yes, Guinea, you have the floor.
Oui, merci, Madame. Une fois encore, je crois que la Guinée soutient déjà ce document, en ce sens qu'au jour d'aujourd'hui, nul n'est censé de ne pas savoir que la réussite de tout ce qu'on est en train d'entreprendre aujourd'hui comme moyen de subsistance les communautés représentent une bonne partie. Donc, il serait mieux que vraiment ces communautés soient accompagnées dans la préservation de nos ressources animales et végétales. Donc, la Guinée, sa position est claire. Nous soutenons ce document. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Guinea. So I will open the floor to non-parties and to observers who might like to comment on this. We'll take several of you. I will not be able to take lots and lots of you. I think that's all right. I will start with IUCN, please. IUCN, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. This intervention is on behalf of IUCN, Traffic and WWF. The CITES Secretariat and the Intersessional Working Group on CITES and Livelihoods under the chairmanship of Peru have undertaken some excellent work in compiling case studies on the conservation and livelihood benefits of trade in CITES-listed species. Nevertheless, the completion of tasks outlined in the decisions 18.33 to 18.37 on livelihoods remains incomplete. We therefore welcome this proposal to renew the CoP18 decisions and in particular to re-establish an intersessional working group to take this agenda forward, including coordinating with the intersessional working group proposed under Agenda Item 13 on engagement of Indigenous peoples and local communities, since these two agendas are closely connected. We'll be keen to participate in the intersessional working group if formed and to provide technical support where needed. And if I may take the liberty just to note that there is a side event very specifically on this issue on Friday lunchtime, showcasing some of the case studies that have been compiled over the past intersessional period. So encourage people to come along to that to understand more about the work of the CITES and Livelihoods Working Group. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, IUCN. I see Fundación Franz Weber.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Como es la primera vez que tomamos la palabra, queremos agradecer al pueblo de Panamá por su hospitalidad y la organización de este evento. Hago esta intervención en nombre de 12 organizaciones no gubernamentales, cuyos nombres entregaremos por escrito. Apoyamos la posición de Burkina Faso, Togo, Israel y otras partes con respecto a este documento. Las comunidades locales y los pueblos indígenas en particular juegan un papel vital en la conservación de la vida silvestre. Estos pueblos han desarrollado durante siglos prácticas muy exitosas en el uso de especies silvestres y domésticas que se caracterizan por ser diversificados, de bajo riesgo y bajo impacto ecológico, y que son fundamentales para conservar la biodiversidad y asegurar medios de subsistencia realmente sostenibles. Nos parece que los estudios de caso y las guías sobre las CITES y medios de subsistencia han perdido la oportunidad de identificar condiciones reales para habilitar y facilitar la contribución de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales a la conservación de la vida silvestre en el contexto de la implementación de las CITES. La Fundación Franz Weber ha realizado un análisis exhaustivo de estos estudios, encontrando una serie de problemas. Por ejemplo, estos estudios se enfocan solo en los beneficios, pero ignoran los costos, lo que es insuficiente para evaluar la sostenibilidad. Además, examinan solo una muestra muy pequeña de posibles estrategias para medios de vida sostenibles, enfatizando el comercio de vida silvestre, pero sin reconocer las ventajas de los usos no consultivos y los medios de vida alternativos. Finalmente, mientras que las recomendaciones de las guías promueven el comercio y una mayor explotación de la vida silvestre, la evidencia muestra en realidad que el comercio internacional quita o reduce la mayoría de los beneficios a los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales. La CITES es una convención para proteger la vida silvestre, no para promover el comercio. Por estas razones, nuestra recomendación es no proseguir con estos estudios. Si, por el contrario, la conferencia de las partes decide continuarlos, recomendamos enfáticamente corregir los parámetros y términos de referencia de estos estudios. Aprovechamos la oportunidad para avisar a la conferencia que el día de mañana realizaremos un evento paralelo a partir de las 17:15 en la Sala Caribe 7, en donde analizaremos los impactos de los usos consultivos y no consultivos de la vida silvestre en los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales, incluyendo casos de África y América Latina que abordan estos temas en detalle. Este evento paralelo ofrecerá más información que apoya la recomendación de desarrollar parámetros nuevos y no sesgados para nuevos estudios de caso. Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you. I'm going to close my observers list now. So I have 4 observers to speak. So I have Ambercelli, followed by Suko SA, followed by WCS, followed by CBNRM. So Ambercelli, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think similar to document 13, the document 14, I think, faced similar circumstances due to the imperatives of COVID-19. Therefore, I think I'll support the extension of the intersessional working group because the proposal failed to distribute, to show how to provide guidance on equitable distribution of the benefits to the livelihood of the communities. And indeed, it has got serious gaps, hence cannot be supported. So I think just request for extension of the intersessional working group. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambercelli. I see Suko SA.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to start off by saying that I'm going to make this intervention on behalf of a number of NGOs, the list of which I will provide to you. Firstly, this motion does not promote, as some parties may fear, the trade in CITES listed species. It merely facilitates equitable benefit for the communities. Furthermore, it is important to remember that the livelihoods of people and the potential benefits from the wildlife that they are forced to live with will determine their willingness to cooperate and embrace conservation initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you. I see WCS. WCS, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. WCS looks forward to continued discussions on how to further engage Indigenous peoples and local communities in wildlife management and conservation at the national level, including through implementation of CITES, and to the analysis of information on impacts of this implementation on the livelihoods of IPLCs. We engage with many parties on this at the national level. We note that in addition to economic and livelihood benefits that can accrue from effective implementation, there is a significant risk of harm to local livelihoods if this exploitation and trade are illegal or unsustainable. There's always an economic benefit to trade, but it rarely actually accrues significantly and equitably to local communities. We suggest that the case studies in the draft decision should demonstrate the impact, positive or negative, of use of CITES listed species on IPLCs and the conservation of the species. The text that we see assumes that all use is sustainable, all sustainable use benefits Indigenous peoples, or that all use creates conservation benefits. We wish that were true, but it's not always the case, as stated, in fact, by the delegate from Bolivia. The text may preclude, indeed, the inclusion of case studies where the well-being or livelihoods of IPLCs did not benefit, or the benefits were not equitable, or species status still decline. We recommend amendments that will enable a more balanced assessment of benefits, costs, equity, and market conditions of trade in CITES-listed species, as well as the benefits of alternative activities. We think that including case studies that are both positive and negative can actually provide more learning and lessons learned to parties. And if a working group is established on this issue, we would be pleased to participate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, WCS. And my final speaker is CBNRM.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for this opportunity to actually speak. As this is the first time that we are speaking at this session, I would like to congratulate you as chair and also to thank Panama for hosting us at this event in a very beautiful and warm city. I'm speaking on behalf of the Zambian Community Resources Management Forum and also the Community Resources Board Association, which represents more than 80 community-based organizations in Zambia and over 200,000 people who live in rural Zambia. Madam Chair, in Zambia, we are well aware of the contribution of legal wildlife trade to rural communities and the consequences of restricting such trade. When our communities are able to trade in wildlife internationally in a sustainable manner, they create jobs, drive local development projects, pay scholarships for young people like myself, and improve access to essential services. And when such trade is cut off, our people cannot generate these benefits. Rural communities are often marginalized and poor, meaning that these benefits make a substantial difference for their day life. Madam Chair, given this context, would love to know why more case studies are needed to confirm these livelihoods that are linked to wildlife trade. For how long is CITES going to call for more case studies instead of taking action? While the focus on livelihoods in the document 14 are welcome, we urge the parties to take action and ensure that decisions made at this level do not negatively affect poor rural communities. We support the intervention made by IUCN, by the Tanzanian government, and also by the Zambian government. We do not think that it is important, this is an important issue, and it should not be discussed at a national level, because we believe that whatever decisions that are made at CITES level go back to affect the very people that we want to represent, the communities that are living in rural Zambia and many other rural communities within Africa and other continents. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, CBNRM. So I'll just take a moment. Thank you, everyone. I was just conferring with the Secretariat to make sure we'd picked up the same language from Bolivia. So we have had some divergence of views on the need to continue the mandate on this work and therefore agree to adopt the revised decisions, agree to, what's the word, accept the revised decisions. But I've heard a majority in support for doing so, that is agreeing to the revised decisions in Annex 1 to the present document. I did hear one amendment to Decision 18.33, Rev CoP19 from Plurinational State of Bolivia, who wants to insert a reference to require the case studies to also look at the well-being and livelihoods of Indigenous peoples and local communities. I think I've got that right, Bolivia. And so I didn't hear any opposition to that. I think it goes to the spirit of what this decision is attempting to look at. So my proposal, noting that I know that not all parties have agreed to it, is that the committee will recommend the acceptance of the revised decisions contained in Annex 1. Not seeing any opposition to that, so we will also agree to recommend the deletion of Decision 18.37, whose provisions have been incorporated into paragraph B, Decision 18.35, and delete Decision 18.36, because that's been incorporated into Decision 18.35 too. I do see Gabon asking for the floor. Gabon, you have the floor.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Comme annoncé dans notre précédente déclaration, le Gabon n'est pas favorable à la poursuite du groupe de travail intercession sur la CITES et les moyens de subsistance. Toutefois, dans l'intérêt de trouver un terrain d'entente, nous pourrions soutenir le renouvellement des 3 décisions avec certaines modifications. Si vous me le permettez, je vais vous en faire la lecture. Et si nécessaire, nous pouvons également vous soumettre ces modifications par écrit. Sur la base du langage proposé par le comité permanent dans l'annexe 1, notre premier amendement concerne la décision 18.33, paragraphe A. Donc, décision 18.33, Rev CoP19 à l'adresse des parties. Les parties sont invitées à, paragraphe A, rassembler ou réaliser de nouvelles études de cas. Je supprime en utilisant le modèle standard et je remplace par conformément aux paramètres révisés développés par le comité permanent conformément à la décision 18.34 Rev CoP19. Je supprime qui démontre comment le commerce durable et je remplace par évalue si l'utilisation durable des espèces. Le reste inchangé.
I'm sorry, Gabon, can I ask you to go just a little bit slower so we can keep up with you the first time around?
D'accord. Je peux relire le paragraphe tel qu'il serait, serait modifié avec selon notre proposition. Donc, paragraphe A, rassembler ou réaliser de nouvelles études de cas conformément aux paramètres révisés développés par le comité permanent conformément à la décision 18.34 Rev CoP19 qui évalue si l'utilisation durable des espèces inscrites aux annexes de la CITES contribue aux moyens d'existence des peuples autochtones des communautés locales impliqués dans, je remplace ce commerce par cette utilisation et le reste inchangé. En ce qui concerne la décision 18.34 Rev CoP19 à l'adresse du comité permanent, nous proposons d'amender le texte du paragraphe A, basé sur le langage proposé par le comité permanent dans l'annexe 1 du document 14, comme suit. Le comité permanent, paragraphe A, établit un groupe de travail intercession sur la CITES et les moyens d'existence. J'ajoute, avec un équilibre régional et une représentation proportionnelle et diverse des observateurs, sans qu'aucun groupe d'intérêt ne soit surreprésenté. Nous proposons également d'insérer un sous-paragraphe supplémentaire avant le sous-paragraphe petit i, comme suit. Paragraphe petit i examine les études de cas existantes sur la CITES et les moyens de subsistance pour en tirer des leçons afin d'identifier les problèmes liés à la méthodologie utilisée et développer des paramètres révisés pour les nouvelles études de cas afin de s'assurer qu'elles sont impartiales et équilibrées. Je reprends. Examine les études de cas existantes sur la CITES et les moyens d'existence pour en tirer des leçons afin d'identifier les problèmes liés à la méthodologie utilisée et développer des paramètres révisés pour les nouvelles études de cas afin de s'assurer qu'elles sont impartiales et équilibrées. Par conséquent, les paragraphes petit i et 2i initiaux sont renumérotés et modifiés comme suit. Paragraphe 2i examine les nouvelles études de cas sur la CITES et les moyens d'existence. J'ajoute, soumises par les parties en utilisant les paramètres révisés. Le reste inchangé. Et sous paragraphe 3i, examine le projet d'orientation sur l'optimisation des avantages. J'ajoute de la mise en œuvre de la CITES et le reste inchangé jusqu'à et au comité permanent. Et j'ajoute, y compris la nécessité de commander une nouvelle étude indépendante et de préparer de nouvelles directives qui incorporent entièrement les nouvelles études de cas. Je reprends le paragraphe 3i. Examine le projet d'orientation sur l'optimisation des avantages de la mise en œuvre de la CITES et du commerce des espèces inscrites aux annexes de la CITES pour les populations autochtones et les communautés locales et fournit des recommandations au secrétariat et au comité permanent, y compris la nécessité de commander une nouvelle étude indépendante et de préparer de nouvelles directives qui incorporent entièrement les nouvelles études de cas. En ce qui concerne la décision 1835 REF COP19 adressée au secrétariat, nous proposons de supprimer les mots « ou la réalisation de nouvelles études de cas » dans le paragraphe A et de conserver le texte tel que proposé par le comité permanent. Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente.
So we've heard some reasonably detailed suggestions from Gabon. I'm interested in reactions from parties on those. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I'd like to thank the working group of the Standing Committee for bringing forward this work and indeed for undertaking these activities for the past, I think, 2 intercessional periods. I've listened very closely to the discussions here on the floor, and like you, Chair, it was my sense that overall there was a support for the outcomes of the Standing Committee's work. In this regard, Canada would prefer to agree to the decisions in Annex 1 as you had laid them out, Chair, accepting those decisions. As such, Canada would not favor inclusion of the amendments from Gabon. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. Kenya, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, based on the fact that the mandate of the working group is being renewed as proposed by the Standing Committee, Madam Chair, we have followed very closely the recommendation by Gabon, and we wish to support the adoption of those recommendations. If the working group will be established by the committee, we'll want to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenya. European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The EU and its member states support the adoption of the revised decision as lined out in Annex 1 of the document. We can support the suggestion by Bolivia. We cannot support the suggestions and amendments by Gabon. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. South Africa would like to align itself with the comments by the EU and Canada. We think the document has went through a thorough process and it should be accepted as amended by the Chair. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. I'm going to take the 2 remaining parties on my list and then I will close it, but I am hearing more support for the conclusions I had made earlier, but I will take Zimbabwe followed by Niger. Zimbabwe, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, we will not be able to support the recommendations from Gabon. I think we'll stand by the decisions of the Chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zimbabwe, and finally Niger.
Bonsoir, merci bien, Madame la Présidente. Le Niger soutient également cette résolution du Gabon. Merci.
So thank you, everyone, and thank you for your indulgence in me just taking a little bit more of a scan of the room. But I'm comfortable to that the will of the room, the majority of the room, is in support of my original proposal that we adopt the revised decisions, recommend the acceptance of the revised decisions in Annex 1 as they were written, with the addition of the suggestion from Bolivia. I'm grateful, thank you, Gabon, for your intervention and your thoughts, but it appears that the committee wishes to adopt the decisions as they are presented in Annex 1. With that, I propose to close this item. So we will move on to CoP19 document 15, participatory mechanisms for rural communities in CITES. This document has been submitted by Eswatini, Namibia and Zimbabwe. If the speaker from the proponents could request the floor, I will give it to you. Eswatini, Namibia or Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of other proponents, Eswatini and Namibia, Zimbabwe is honored to introduce COP19 Doc 15 Rev 1 titled Participatory Mechanisms for Rural Communities in CITES. The document proposes the establishment of a Rural Communities Advisory Subcommittee within CITES structure. The motivation is to see increased representation of indigenous people and local communities, IPLCs, in decision-making, especially to trade benefits and exploration of sustainable livelihood opportunities. The proponents are aware that CITES, through an intersectional working group on rural communities, is working on a mechanism for engagement of IPLCs. Madam Chair, such an arrangement ensures the involvement and presence of rural communities in CITES decision-making structures. Rural communities constitute the most affected constituency in as far as wildlife conservation and trade decisions are concerned. The need for effective engagement of IPLCs in the CITES process is sincere recognition of IPLCs as the custodians of wildlife resources, and this will facilitate the integration of indigenous traditional knowledge into wildlife conservation interventions. Lessons can be learned from other conventions like the Convention of CBD, which has done well in recognizing and establishing structures to represent rural communities. The subcommittee would be key structure in facilitating and monitoring the implementation of CITES provisions. To do with rural communities, operationalizing Resolution CONF 8.3, Rev COP 13 on recognition of the benefits of trade in wildlife, and Resolution CONF 16.6, Rev COP 17 on CITES and livelihoods with particular focus on capacitating local communities to pursue sustainable livelihood opportunities. This enhances achievement of Sustainable Development Goals of the UN 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development, in particular Goals 1 and 5. The proponents requested the conference to adopt 3 decisions and a special resolution, and the decisions are as follows. 1, a decision that mandates the Standing Committee to consider this proposal and to extend the mandate of the intersectional working group to allow it to present findings and recommendations to Standing Committee 77. 2, a decision that mandates the Standing Committee to establish a Rural Communities Advisory Subcommittee for consideration at SC 77. And finally, the proposed third decision would mandate the Secretariat to prepare background documentation to support the Standing Committee in implementation of Decision 19AA. I submit, Chair.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. Before I open the floor to parties, because I do want to hear from parties now, I've had observers asking for the floor before I've opened the floor to you, and that makes it really difficult for me to see parties in the order. So I'll give you the opportunity to press your button and take you off. I will come to you, observers, but otherwise I'll have to ask the technicians to clear the screen so I can start to request parties. It's just the way I see things is in various orders, and then you show up in the middle of parties and it makes it difficult for me. Thank you. All right, I just have parties on my list now, so I will take Namibia. Namibia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to confirm as contained in document CoP19, Doc 15, that Namibia is indeed one of the proponents of the document as introduced by Zimbabwe. We thank Zimbabwe for introducing the document. Chair, in the interest of time, we are not going to repeat what Zimbabwe has already said, because that was said on behalf of the three proponents. However, allow us to emphasize to this meeting that over 80% of our elephant population live alongside with our local communities. More than 50% of our land population are outside our national parks. Our local communities bear the brunt of living with wildlife, consequently suffer major losses associated with human-wildlife conflicts. Human lives are lost, crop fields are destroyed daily, loss of livestock is a daily occurrence. Therefore, Madam Chair, the engagement of local communities in CITES decision-making process or processes is crucial. Madam Chair, Namibia would like to therefore join Zimbabwe in calling on all parties present here to support the recommendations contained in paragraph 16 of the document and all the draft decisions contained in paragraph 17. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Namibia. I see Burkina Faso.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Cette question des communautés intrigue beaucoup le Burkina Faso. Bien que notre pays soutienne l'engagement des communautés rurales, que ce soit dans le cadre du processus de la CITES ou d'autres instances de négociation multilatérales comme la Convention sur la diversité biologique. Mais il faut dire qu'il nous est très difficile de soutenir ce document pour un certain nombre de raisons, et j'en donnerai seulement 3. Et il y a une proposition similaire avait été rejetée lors de la COP17 en 2016. Il y avait un comité permanent comme celui qui proposait dans ce document risque de créer un précédent en accordant un pouvoir disproportionné à un groupe de parties prenantes de la CITES par rapport aux autres. Cela peut créer un profond déséquilibre, nous le pensons, au sein du processus décisionnel de la CITES. Ça, c'est vraiment nos préoccupations. Ensuite, cette proposition, si elle était établie, va impliquer bien sûr la prise en compte des impacts socio-économiques potentiels des décisions de la CITES. Nous pensons que cette approche pourrait être utilisée pour tenter de modifier les critères d'inscription à la CITES. Les parties ont convenu à de nombreuses reprises que les critères d'inscription à la CITES doivent être basés sur l'évaluation scientifique et le principe de précaution. Les parties avaient bien rejeté les tentatives précédentes d'intégrer des considérations socio-économiques dans la proposition d'inscription. Une proposition comme celle-ci, nous le pensons, pourrait faire des critères socio-économiques un élément dissuasif pour la protection des espèces sauvages, ce qui va augmenter, nous le pensons, les risques de surexploitation, toute chose qui va à l'encontre des objectifs de notre Convention, en participant à des consultations nationales ou à d'autres instances de négociations multilatérales. Voici, pour ne retenir que ces 3 raisons, que le Burkina Faso ne voudrait pas soutenir ce document et invite les uns et les autres pays à analyser notre pensée et si elle est juste de ne pas soutenir ce document. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Burkina Faso. I will flag with you that I already have as many parties as I probably will have time to take, so I will close my list for now. If we get through things quickly, I might be able to take a few more parties. Those parties who've added while I'm speaking, I've closed my list. I'm very sorry. If I can, I will come to you. So on my list next is Senegal.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Je sais qu'une séance nocturne n'est pas souvent aisée, mais nous sommes là pour un travail pour lequel nous sommes mandatés. Et pour moi, le temps n'a pas de prix ici. J'ai des inquiétudes parce que depuis, voilà, 3 COP, ces questions ne cessent d'être suscitées. 2016, 2019, 2022. Ces 3 aspects relatifs aux documents 13, 14 et 15 sont toujours énoncés. Et malgré les groupes de travail qui ont été mis en place, on n'est pas encore arrivé à trouver une issue. Si bien que je me pose la question, peut-être que j'ai une mauvaise compréhension de la CITES. Je crois que la CITES, ce n'est pas une convention qui dit qu'il faut à tout prix faire le commerce au détriment de la conservation. Parce que si l'idée c'est de faire le commerce sans tenir compte de certains paramètres, là on peut dire que la CITES va vider la ressource et ça va compromettre les modes d'existence des populations locales. Or, cela n'est pas le cas. Parce que si une espèce est inscrite en annexe 2, elle peut être commercialisée, mais pourvu qu'il y ait une évaluation qui approuve que le mode de prélèvement serait soutenable. Donc, c'est la CNP. Donc, la CITES ne fait que réguler. Ça, c'est un. Deuxièmement, même si l'espèce est admise, acceptée en annexe 2 pour pouvoir faire le commerce, mais la CITES n'impose pas les États. Les États sont souverains pour dire, malgré l'espèce inscrite en annexe 2, nous optons pour un quota zéro. Personne ne viendra dire à l'État non commercialisé. Donc moi je dis, et je l'ai dit depuis, j'attends de voir qu'est-ce que ça va donner, mais sachez que voilà 3 ans que nous faisons de surplace sur cette question. La participation des populations, je l'ai dit, ce n'est pas donné à tous nos États autant pour moi, de pouvoir faire une délégation des populations locales pour venir ici. D'abord, nos États, souvent, ce n'est pas tous les États, en tout cas, je prends le cas du Sénégal. Un seul billet a été mis, nous sommes trouvés arrangés pour trouver d'autres billets par des partenaires. Vouloir amener les populations encore ici pour des questions de représentation. C'est comme si notre voix ne représente pas seulement. Nous sommes là pour le peuple sénégalais. Pourquoi autant de redondance? Je suis d'accord qu'il faut prendre en compte les intérêts des populations parce que nous n'intervenons dans nos pays que pour l'intérêt des populations. Donc, je crois qu'il y a des problèmes. Et je voudrais surtout demander à ces groupes, parce qu'il faut faire des études pour qu'on arrive à de très bonnes conclusions, de demander à toutes les parties ici présentes de mettre sur la table, de communiquer qu'est-ce qu'ils partagent, quelle est la clé de répartition que les parties font au sein de leur pays sur les bénéfices de la conservation. Je m'explique. Nous, au Sénégal, on n'est pas un pays, je l'ai dit tantôt, un pays très grand forestier, mais nous faisons des aménagements dans lesquels nous sortons de l'énergie domestique à travers le charbon. Les territoires où les plants sont mis en valeur, les recettes sont partagées ainsi. 60% pour l'État, 40% pour les populations. Et je crois que c'est une bonne clé de répartition. Je souhaite que vraiment qu'on mette sur la table pour qu'on ait une idée plus grande ce que les États font complet de répartition avec les populations. Sinon, j'ai l'impression qu'on est en train de défendre une cause alors qu'en réalité, les populations sont lésées. Nos populations sont lésées sur le terrain. Je suis du village, ça je le dis haut et fort. Gérons cela à l'interne par nos textes nationaux plutôt que d'aller à un niveau plus élevé pour s'engouffrer dans une démarche pour laquelle on ne sortira pas. Je n'ai rien de contre, faites les études, on verra qu'est-ce que ça sera comme résultat. Merci.
Thank you. Senegal, I see Togo. Togo, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Le Togo soutient les interventions du Burkina Faso et du Sénégal. En effet, la création d'un comité permanent comme celui qui est proposé impliquerait des modifications profondes de l'architecture institutionnelle de la CITES, qui n'améliorerait pas nécessairement les procédures de mise en œuvre. Elle ne faciliterait pas le fonctionnement de la Convention si elle veut atteindre les objectifs qui lui sont assignés. Voilà pourquoi le Togo, à l'instar du Burkina Faso et du Sénégal, s'oppose à cette proposition. Merci.
Thank you. Togo, Democratic Republic of the Congo, you have the floor.
C'est moi. Merci, Madame la Présidente, de la parole. Sans communauté locale, la protection des espèces sauvages n'est pas possible. Or, elles sont souvent oubliées et non encouragées pour les loups tribus de la conservation de la diversité biologique et la protection des espèces sauvages qu'elles payent. Certaines communautés vont jusqu'à sacrifier de leur vie par suite des conflits hommes-faune sauvage. Les transferts des populations de ces saintes espèces de l'annexe D à l'annexe 1 aggravent encore la situation des communautés rurales et favorisent leur pauvreté. Alors la CITES devra s'inscrire dans la protection des droits humains des communautés rurales, raison pour laquelle la RDC soutient la mise en place d'un mécanisme participatif pour les communautés rurales au sein de la CITES, tel que proposé par les Swatini, la Namibie et le Zimbabwe. Donc mon pays soutient cette proposition. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Democratic Republic of the Congo. I see Botswana. Botswana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. Botswana would like to thank the proponents of this proposal, being the Republic of Eswatini, Namibia, and Zimbabwe, for coming up with this timely proposal that calls for the consideration of the voice of the local communities inside its decision-making processes. As stated in the proposal, rural communities occupy important wildlife habitats and have the ability to displace wildlife unless an incentive system is in place to encourage coexistence with wildlife. For instance, Botswana has devoted 17% of its land surface for game reserves and national parks, and a further 22% of community-managed conservation areas in the form of wildlife management areas. If local communities in Botswana do not derive any benefit from wildlife utilization and consider CITES to be a constraint rather than a facilitator of the sustainable use of wildlife on their land, Botswana risks this 40% of its surface area, which is over 228,000 kilometers squared, from conservation-related use towards other competing land uses. This risks to land conversion exist in many of the parties that have genuinely invested in wildlife conservation. Botswana believes that it is imperative that indigenous people and local communities benefit from natural resources they coexist with, and we call for their concerns to be heard, for them to have a voice at the CITES decision-making. This can only be attained by having a subcommittee that will advise the Animals and Plants Committee on issues of IPLCs as proposed by the proponents of this proposal. Therefore, Botswana supports the proposed decision by Eswatini, Namibia, and Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Thank you, Botswana. I still have several parties on my list. I would remind everyone of my request to keep your interventions as short as possible so I can hear from everyone on my list. So next on my list is United Republic of Tanzania, followed by the USA. United Republic of Tanzania, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The United Republic of Tanzania would like to align ourselves with Zimbabwe, Botswana, and all parties that support this proposal. We wish to state that
communities are an integral part of conservation processes, and we do not object to the role that CITES is playing in ensuring that there is sustainable use of wildlife resources. However, we have also to understand that local communities have their needs, and that any decisions that affect them, they will have a plan B. We are worried in the next upcoming CITES conferences, if communities are not given the role to play within the CITES, we'd find ourselves discussing the issues which communities are not interested, but also the resources that we are talking about here will not be there anymore because they will have a plan B for the resources on their land. Thank you.
Thank you. Tanzania, United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. As we noted when the issue of rural communities was first raised at the COP17 and again at COP18, the United States recognizes the needs and interests of local populations as being crucial regarding wildlife use and trade. Indeed, successful conservation depends on their participation and partnership. However, the convention is a treaty among parties, and it is incumbent on the parties in their national processes as appropriate to consult broadly, including with local peoples, in the process of determining their positions on decisions, resolutions, and changes to species listings in the appendices. For this reason, the United States opposes the recommendations of this document, including the establishment of a new permanent rural community advisory subcommittee. We supported the recommendation of the Secretariat to not adopt the recommendations in the earlier version of this document, particularly as a number of the issues raised in this proposal are being addressed in the CITES and Livelihoods Res Conf 16.6, Rev COP 18 and COP19 Doc 14 livelihoods, as well as the work being undertaken in the decision on livelihoods and current and draft decisions concerning indigenous peoples and local communities. However, we did become aware of a revised document with a different recommendation from the Secretariat that appeared shortly before the start of this meeting. We're concerned by the late submission of this revised document and continue to oppose its recommendations as they may lead to the development of a permanent subcommittee. The United States believes that the creation of a permanent committee or subcommittee as contemplated in the document would be inconsistent with the established procedures of the parties and redundant of existing terms of reference of the permanent committees and existing resolutions. The proposed subcommittee would require substantial time and resources from the Secretariat and CITES Trust Fund to implement. The Secretariat's recommendation to establish a time-limited subcommittee does not solve these problems. The short lead time in which the Secretariat has proposed the amended draft decisions requires additional time for parties to consider. As articulated in other fora, the United States does not support endorsing the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Peasants and Other People Working in Rural Areas because of persistent fundamental difficulties with the text of the declaration proposed for adoption. With that said, the United States administration takes seriously its responsibility and has committed to bringing knowledge of rural and indigenous communities into policy decision-making and is supportive of meaningful consultation and engagement with these communities, even beyond the constraints of CITES. We have robust processes in place to solicit comments from all communities, tribal, local, and others, regarding U.S. work with CITES policy and CITES listed species, and firmly believe the rural and local communities and indigenous peoples play a vital role in informing the CITES decision-making process. We would be happy to share and learn in engaging in these diverse conservation partners and integrating their knowledge and interests. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, United States. I see South Africa, followed by Zambia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. South African government has initiated a program back in 2004 with an effort to coordinate participation of rural communities living in and around conservation areas. We are honored today to be joined by one of community representatives from South Africa, and I would like to give Mr. Magakane an opportunity to speak on behalf of rural communities in South Africa that need to be recognized by this COP for the sacrifices they continue to make in putting the land for conservation of wild species, despite other available land uses that communities are confronted with. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representing rural communities in South Africa, I would like to congratulate and appreciate the proposal tabled by Eswatini, Namibia, and Zimbabwe. As a community leader representing millions of rural people who have put aside their land for conservation in perpetuity, who live with wildlife, whose livelihoods depend on wildlife, but most importantly, who assist authorities in the management of threats to the natural resources, the South African rural communities support the proposal to have rural communities included in the decision-making processes of CITES under the Standing Committee, and looking forward to more action and implementation taking place between now and COP20. I thank you.
Thank you, South Africa. I see Zambia, and then I will take the European Union.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for once again giving Zambia the floor to add her voice to the debate. Zambia fully supports document 15 as presented by Zimbabwe on behalf of the proponents, for the reason being that local communities are critical stakeholders in the co-management of wildlife in rural parts of Zambia, and as such must have a voice on issues that affect their livelihoods through a participatory mechanism in CITES. I submit, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Zambia. European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The EU and its member states thank Eswatini, Namibia, and Zimbabwe for their proposal, which covers an important topic. As previously discussed, there are two separate processes focusing on engagement of indigenous peoples and local communities and livelihoods. We note the late changes made by the proponents to document 15 in Ref 1. As pointed out by the Secretariat in their comments, the proposed composition of the Rural Communities Advisory Subcommittee in paragraph 16b is not in line with the Resolution Conf 18.2, and only parties would be able to participate in such a subcommittee if established. In order to be efficient and consistent when it comes to engagement of indigenous people and local as well as rural communities, we invite the proponents to align their proposal with the processes we already discussed under agenda points 13 and 14, and to submit it in the respective working group or both working groups as appropriate for consideration. We do not see the need for a third separate process. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union. So I have 3 parties remaining on my original list. I have Mali, followed by the United Kingdom, followed by Niger. So I'll take you in that order. Please, Mali.
Merci bien, Madame la Présidente. C'est ma première fois de prendre le micro ici, devant cette assemblée. C'est pour remercier au nom de mon pays le peuple panaméen qui a accepté d'abriter cette COP19. Nous vous remercions aussi, nous vous félicitons, Madame, pour votre nomination. Pour ne pas aller trop loin, je vais être bref. Ça veut dire que dans mon pays, les communautés ont une place privilégiée dans la mesure où nous sommes des produits issus de ces communautés. C'est pourquoi, au niveau de notre législation, l'État malien a constaté une grande partie pour aider les populations dans le cadre de la clé de répartition des recettes, où l'État malien affecte déjà 20% des recettes et 65% qui sont affectés au Fonds d'aménagement et de protection de la faune et des forêts. Donc, je ne vais pas être long, comme je l'ai dit. Le Mali soutient la philosophie dégagée par le Kenya, le Burkina Faso, le Sénégal, le Togo. Donc, à cet effet, nous nous opposons justement au document qui a été présenté ici. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Mali, United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. The UK would like to thank the proponents, Eswatini, Namibia and Zimbabwe, for this proposal. The UK acknowledges the importance of hearing the views of IPLCs. As such, we have given this paper, and in particular the proposal for a new Rural Communities Committee or Subcommittee, very careful consideration. And we would like to align with the comments of Burkina Faso and others in not supporting the proposal. We do not feel it would be the best way to achieve improved engagement with IPLCs or the best use of limited resources available to us. We also have concerns that this would duplicate effort. We also note the extensive referencing in the document to the UN resolution on the rights of peasants and other people working in rural areas, and the call by the proponents to endorse it. Consideration of this UN resolution took place in the UN Human Rights Council, the appropriate forum for such discussions. We therefore cannot support this being reopened or endorsed within CITES. As we have already indicated when discussing Document 13, the UK fully supports the continuation of the intersessional working group. We consider its mandate to be broad enough to facilitate a consideration of different models for effective engagement of IPLCs on the basis that Decision 1831 directed to the working group to consider how to effectively engage IPLCs in the CITES processes. We look forward to continuing to engage constructively on this important issue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Niger, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Madame la Présidente, le Niger fait partie des pays très engagés et regardants pour les besoins communautaires. Les lois nationaux protègent bien les communautés où les dividendes de la conservation sont partagés à 50-50, 50% pour les communautés et 50% pour la conservation. Cela montre que le Niger participe beaucoup dans le cadre, le Niger est trop regardant dans le cadre de la participation des communautés dans la conservation. Donc, Madame la Présidente, les besoins des communautés rurales sont déjà pris en compte dans les différentes lois nationales. Je pense qu'il est important peut-être de revoir ces lois, mais sinon, dans nos pays, ces besoins sont pris en compte. Sinon, on risque de créer des doublons, parce que la CITES est une convention des parties et non des communautés. Et si on s'engage dans cette lancée, on risque vraiment d'avoir des doublons on ne sait pas là où ces doublons vont nous amener. Madame la Présidente, ces communautés, si je ne me trompe, peut-être les auteurs de cette proposition sont en train de voir d'autres perspectives qui n'est pas la représentation de ces communautés au niveau des instances de la CITES. Madame la Présidente, nous voulons que ces auteurs puissent s'ouvrir mieux au lieu de faire des va-et-vient aux différentes COP, qu'ils s'ouvrent mieux pour qu'on puisse comprendre derrière ça qu'est-ce qu'ils veulent dire, pour qu'on puisse comprendre réellement. Madame la Présidente, si vraiment cette clarification n'y est pas, le Niger s'oppose à la proposition telle présentée par les auteurs. Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Niger. I will just take a moment. So I am going to take just a few more parties who have been waiting. So we'll take Japan. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Japan appreciates for preparing this document for proponent countries. Local people living side by side with wildlife play an indispensable role in its conservation, such as habitat conservation, as well as anti-poaching activities on the ground. Also, they have a lot of local knowledge to understand how to realize sustainable use, satisfying local needs, and the socioeconomic effects on the CITES decision. Therefore, rural community engaged in the CITES process is essential for the effective CITES implementation. Madam Chair, we need to be aware of that now we have IP-based sustainable use of wild species assessment, which we didn't have previous COPs. And it pointed out CITES need to strengthen socioeconomic aspects in order to implement more effective. Based on this, Japan supported the idea of strengthening their participation and enhanced synergy between CITES and the Convention on Biological Diversity, especially with its work under the ad hoc open-ended working group on Article 8J and the related provision of the TBD. Japan indeed understands the established rural communities advisory subcommittee had a tremendous meaning for participatory mechanism for rural communities in CITES. At the same time, we are aware of the tasks under CITES has been steadily increasing where resources are limited. Therefore, Japan supports the Secretariat proposal, which further consider this matter under standing committee, and Japan will contribute its work. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. I see Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On this agenda, Indonesia supports the proposal for the consultation mechanism with rural communities in relation with the CITES decision-making process. In terms of policy, we believe that it would be improper for this committee to oppose this idea regardless of how the technicalities of the process. For that, we thank and congratulate the proponents, Eswatini, Namibia, and Zimbabwe for their efforts. Of course, if consensus on this proposal is really not possible, we propose that at least the proposed landing zone provided by the Secretariat, as mentioned by Japan as well, could be agreed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia. China, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Experiences from around the world tell us that sustainable use of wild species is enhanced considerably when management regimes are developed and implemented with the active involvement of rural communities in the decision-making process. In keeping with the 2018 UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and Other People Working in Rural Areas, CITES should make every effort to incorporate the views and concerns of rural communities in its decision-making framework. This represents an important step forward by CITES that needs careful consideration. For this reason, Madam Chair, China supports adopting the 2 draft decisions revised by the Secretariat in CoP19 Doc 15, Rev 1. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, China. Okay, parties. It's clear to me that we are reasonably evenly split on this. I'm going to take observers very briefly. I'm going to ask for very brief interventions while we just wrap this matter up. So I will take Conservation Force because you've been waiting for a while. Conservation Force.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm making this intervention on behalf of a series of organizations, and I will give the name to the rapporteurs later on, representing a network of that advocates for sustainable use of natural resources and millions of conservation stakeholders worldwide. Madam Chair, there is no real conservation of natural resources and wildlife without the informed and active participation of indigenous people and local communities. They are the best protectors of wildlife, provided they receive benefits from the legal trade. Vague but yet pointed objections to the above are carried out mainly by organizations that are trying to deny IPLC a voice in the CITES decision-making just because they are parasiting IPLC with donor-driven projects. The West African states that intervene were off topic in saying that the proposed subcommittee is of a permanent nature. Probably they have not read the document and the comments from the Secretariat. The proposed subcommittee established in accordance with Resolution 18.2, paragraph F, is of a temporary nature. People that live alongside wildlife will undoubtedly decide on its face and not armchair disingenuous NGOs that most likely are interested in rich funding than on wildlife conservation and the livelihoods of people who live with wildlife. Madam Chair, this convention is 50 years old and has still not found any mechanism to involve in its decision-making the people that can act as a positive game changer in biodiversity conservation. How can we speak, Madam Chair, of zoonotic disease if we don't see the malaise in our rural people that are most always the poorest of the poor. How can we continue, Madam Chair, to allow that they are mistreated and harassed in the name of fortress conservation projects? How can we resolve the biodiversity crisis without IPLCs, as rightly pointed out by the latest IPBES assessment on sustainable use? How can we have an informed discussion on gender-related matters without IPLCs? And how can we ensure legal trade without mechanism to involve IPLCs in the value chain? Madam Chair, IPLCs around the world have an unsurpassed knowledge of biodiversity. Is CITES willing to isolate itself as one of the few MEAs which does not yet recognize a role for IPLCs? Parties, this is a wake-up call. Through the mechanism foreseen in document 15, you have now the possibility to start to discuss in a quiet and unpressured platform the best way to give IPLCs a voice in CITES decision. Do not deny yourself this unique, fair, and overdue opportunity. Give the system envisaged in document 15 a chance for the benefit of people that you are representing and your biodiversity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Conservation Force. We'll just remind everyone that we are all committed to being here, and I would like us to remain courteous and polite with people. Just aware of the rules of procedure and how they reflect on those kinds of matters. Now, I'm running out of time to take too many observers. I would like to hear from Born Free Foundation. Born Free.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm making this intervention on behalf of 9 observer organisations and the Species Survival Network, and I'll provide the full list to the Secretariat. Indigenous peoples and local communities are clearly vital constituencies whose views should be taken into account at international forums such as CITES. However, community groups already have the right to participate in CITES processes as observers in the same way that any civil society representatives can, and there are dangers in elevating the status of any one group of observers over others. It's also not clear who would represent Indigenous peoples and local community groups on the subcommittee proposed in CoP19 Doc 15, what its mandate would be, how it would be funded, and how geographic balance would be achieved. We note that a similar proposal was rejected at COP17. Governments can and should take into account the impacts of CITES processes on livelihoods during national stakeholder engagement on implementation, as is already mandated by Resolution Conf 16.6, Rev COP 18, on CITES and livelihoods. Engagement is also covered under the terms of COP19 documents 13 and 14, which have already been recommended for adoption by this committee. As articulated by Burkina Faso, allowing socio-economic factors to influence listing decisions could undermine the core remit of the Convention. So we would urge parties to oppose the proposed establishment of a Rural Communities Advisory Subcommittee in COP19 Document 15 and instead support the representation of IPLCs through national stakeholder forums and as registered observers at CITES meetings. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Born Free. I will take 2 more very short interventions from observers. I would like you to keep them to a minute or a minute and a half if you possibly can. I would like to hear from Community Leaders Network, Southern Africa, and then I will take Speak Out for Animals. Community Leaders Network, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, since we are taking the floor for the first time, I would like to thank Panama as a host country for organizing this event and the Secretariat, and also to thank you for being chair of this committee. I'm making this intervention on behalf of the Community Leaders Network of Southern Africa, which represents millions of people in rural areas living alongside wildlife in Angola, Botswana, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. We are also making this intervention on behalf of our community-based organizations in all these 9 countries, the list of which I will provide to the rapporteurs. Our network is also a member of the African Civil Society Organizations Biodiversity Alliance, which is a Pan-African body in Africa, ACBA. Madam Chair, as rural communities representatives, we fully support document 15 and the proposals are made by Zimbabwe, Eswatini, and Namibia. Rural communities are the ultimate custodians of fauna and flora around the world. Since communities are being excluded from decision-making process at CITES, conservation is suffering. We can already see that conservation is suffering. Madam Chair, our communities may not have the political power that we are seeing in here, but they live with the wildlife on a daily basis. Ultimately, we decide the fate of wildlife. We are the ones who live with this wildlife. We want a positive outcome from this COP. We've had enough. This time around, we want an outcome that is positive. Therefore, we would like to discuss more about the benefits of legal trade than illegal trade. If communities continue to be left out of CITES decisions about the wildlife we are living with, we have the power to remove wildlife and convert natural habitat to other uses. Without any incentive to conserve animals that sustainably use their woodlands and forests, we bear the cost for conservation. If our communities are left behind and no longer conserve the wildlife and habitats, what will CITES discuss when you meet at these COPs, during future COPs? There will be no fauna and flora left to discuss. And that's why we are bringing this agenda. And we are calling for communities to be given space. Madam Chair, we must bring communities into CITES decision-making processes. I think document 15, just a practical way forward to achieve this goal.
Community Leaders Network, I'm sorry, you've had 3 minutes.
So I can conclude, but...
That would be wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, I can conclude, Madam Chair. Our message is very simple. We as communities, we play a greater role, and we hope and we call the parties to reflect before we conclude this discussion, because the role of communities is undisputable. All those governments I've heard speaking, they know what they are talking that's not correct. I think communities' interests must be put at hand. I submit, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Community Leaders Network, Southern Africa. I apologize, observers, that I can't give more of you the floor, but I will take Speak Out for Animals as my final observer.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. As Speak Out for Animals, we are in support of the proposal by Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Eswatini to involve local communities and set up this distinct committee. Social and economic matters cannot be ignored as they are part of the drivers of trade. The fact that this matter has been raised quite a number of times and is still being tabled means that the current status quo seems not to be addressing the concerns of rural communities. It is important to have this distinct group representing the communities, as they are the ones who live with the animals and have the better appreciation of the intrinsic value of wildlife, which then leads to the greater good of extrinsic wildlife of trade. Trade is meant to address the socio-economic needs of those who can afford and demand the products. So it is therefore fair and just to also consider the need of those ranged countries that cohabit with the animals and also to respect and protect their views. Thank you.
Thank you. Speak Out for Animals. So, as I indicated before we heard from the observers, we're fairly evenly split on this matter. The only possible middle ground that I see that we have heard suggested from Japan, Indonesia and China would be the revised decisions from the Secretariat in their Rev 1. Now, I know those are not supported by everyone, but I did want to table that as a possible way forward before we deal with the more formal ways of deciding on things. So I will take a few, technicians, if you could clear the list, please. I will take a few party reflections on my suggestion. Thank you. My list is now clear. So any parties who would like to reflect on that as a possible way forward? European Union, I see you. European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. In regards to our earlier comments, I'd like to respectfully recall that we speak on behalf of the EU and its 27 member states. And I'd like just to respectfully recall that in regards to your remarks that we are evenly split. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union. Kenya, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We had requested the floor earlier to align to the position of Burkina Faso and Senegal and the rest that opposed this decision. Madam Chair, it is our considered opinion that the proposed decision can be well covered in the two working groups already agreed upon. And we also do not agree with the proposal made by China, Japan, to go along the Secretariat's recommendation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Kenya. I will take Senegal and Zimbabwe in that order. Senegal, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Nous savons que vous avez les difficultés que vous avez pour avancer dans le programme, mais autant mettre le temps et parler correctement et arriver à des décisions qui feront la compréhension de tout le monde. Un observateur a dit ici que l'Afrique de l'Ouest pense que ce comité va être éternel. Non. Autant les autres parties qui sont soucieuses d'accorder des parts importantes aux populations locales, nous le sommes aussi dans notre sous-région. Je puis vous dire, et j'ai toujours dit ici que je suis issu du village, je veux un partage équitable des bénéfices de la conservation. Mais quand la CITES, c'est un accord multilatéral des partis, vous ne pouvez pas venir encore demander aux partis de se diviser à l'intérieur. C'est comme si on ne fait pas foi à notre parole de représentation du Sénégal, ici par exemple. On demande que d'autres populations viennent. Nous disons que la prise en compte des intérêts des populations est incontournable en matière de conservation, mais elle doit se matérialiser par des dispositions législatives nationales. Et je donne toujours un exemple. Nous, au Sénégal, il y a un décret de répartition des taxes et redevances liées à la conservation, qui va à 40% pour les populations, 60% pour l'État. Ça, c'est un. Deuxièmement, quand une infraction est commise dans une communauté, les 70% sont versés au compte de cette communauté. Qu'est-ce qu'on veut de plus? Et je dis, si l'étude doit passer, que le comité puisse faire un tableau référentiel au niveau de tous les États.
Senegal.
Oui,
Senegal,
pour
I'm
montrer
very sorry.
qu'est-ce que les pays donnent aux populations locales et qu'est-ce que l'État prend. Merci.
Thank you, Senegal. I would remind parties that I'm just taking comments at this point on my option that I suggested, noting the comments that we've heard from Senegal and Kenya. So I have two more parties on my screen. I will take brief interventions from both of them, and then I will close the list again. So I will take Canada and then Zimbabwe. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and I also thank all my fellow parties for this robust discussion, which I have found very informative and interesting. Canada's original position on the document presented was that we were not in a position to support a permanent committee, or indeed the revised option of establishing an advisory subcommittee, as we had some questions about governance and functioning. Canada was in a position to consider the Secretariat's proposal for considering the feasibility of that within a discussion. However, having listened to the debate, it is, and recognizing some of the interventions heard, particularly from the EU and the UK, I think Canada's proposed suggested way forward would be to recognize that the terms of reference for the working group that we previously discussed under item 13 are robust enough to consider the ideas that are being brought forward here, such as the feasibility of an advisory committee, and that, like the EU, we could invite the proponents to bring those ideas to that working group when it is struck by the standing committee. In this regard, it doesn't seem necessary to adopt the decisions that the Secretariat is proposing in the interests of finding a path forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. And finally, I'll take Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Zimbabwe supports the Secretariat proposal and the way forward provided by the Chair. I thank you.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. Okay, thank you, everyone. I think Canada has made the point, similar points raised, I think, by the United Kingdom and the European Union, that there is the avenue that we have already agreed, or we have agreed to recommend to the COP, that the work on engagement of Indigenous people and local communities continues under the Standing Committee. And those parties are suggesting that that would be a good avenue for consideration of the issues proposed in this document. I don't see significant enough support for the adoption of the recommendations of this paper, nor the Secretariat's proposed amendments. So I don't think that we can adopt either of those or recommend the adoption of either of those here today. So I'm going to suggest that we agree that we recommend that the engagement of Indigenous people and local communities working group of the Standing Committee take into account the matters raised in this document and the recommendations raised in this document and all of the matters that we've discussed today. And we take that as our recommendation to the COP. I don't see any reactions to that. I think that is the best way we can make a decision here, make a decision to recommend to the COP. So not seeing any opposition to that. Senegal, I will give you the opportunity to speak very briefly as to whether or not you agree or oppose my suggested way forward. Senegal, you have the floor.
Oui, je voudrais bien dire, Madame la Présidente, après ce tour d'horloge de débat très intéressant et enrichissant, vous êtes parvenu à une recommandation, une conclusion qui me semble sage pour continuer le débat, parce que, comme tout le monde, nous sommes conscients de l'intérêt qu'il faut accorder aux populations locales. Merci.
Thank you, Senegal. So I think that will be the way that we move forward. Thank you, everyone. I'm keeping an eye on the quorum numbers here, and I'm going to ask parties if you could remain with us for the next, I was too late. We have lost our quorum, so if there is a party leaving who would like to return so that we can keep our quorum, otherwise we will lose another half an hour of our meeting time. We've lost several hours over the last 2 days. Well, no, 70. Ooh. It's very interesting watching the numbers. I will give it a few minutes to see if we magically pop back up into quorum. It looks like someone in the room is plugging and unplugging their card because it's changing quite quickly. If you are here, if you can just make sure if your card's inserted properly, we'd appreciate it.
Go ahead.
So I do have quorum again. Thank you for everyone in the room. I appreciate that. I will keep an eye on it. I need your assistance too. So I would like to move on into the species-specific matters. Document 66 on elephants. And I'm hopeful that we can get through some of these reports this evening as long as our quorum stays. So I'd like to start with CoP19 document 66.5, the report on the monitoring the illegal killing of elephants, the MIC. This document has been prepared by the Secretariat, so I'll invite the Secretariat to introduce it. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Document 66.5 has been submitted by the Secretariat and provides information to the Conference of the Parties relating to the implementation of the MIC mandate as contained in Resolution Conference 1010, revision CoP18. The Secretariat would like to thank the African and Asian elephant range states for their continued commitment to and implementation of the CITES MIC program. In 2020, the MIC site network expanded in Asia through the addition of the Yak Dan National Park in Vietnam and the expansion of the Chinati MIC site in Bangladesh to include the larger landscape in which Asian elephants are found, now referred to as the Chattogram MIC site. This brings the total of MIC sites in Asia to 30. In Africa, Hwange National Park in Zimbabwe was added as a MIC site, bringing the total number of MIC sites to 69 for Africa. MIC sites in Africa now represent more than 50% of the African elephant population found on the continent. The MIC program evaluates relative poaching levels based on the proportion of illegally killed elephants, or pike. Pike may be affected by potential biases related to data quality, reporting rate, carcass detection probabilities, variation in natural mortality rates, and other factors, and which should be considered in interpretation of results. Since COP18, the Secretariat, in collaboration with the MIC EDIS Technical Advisory Group, or TAG, finalized the review of the MIC analytical methodology. The Secretariat published 2 reports, Monitoring the Illegal Killing of Elephants, MIC report, Pike Trend Analysis, Methodology and Results, published on 16 November 2020, and Monitoring the Illegal Killing of Elephants, MIC Pike Trend Analysis, 2003 to 2020, published on 1st of November 2021, to provide parties with information relating to the outcome of the review and with the Pike Trend Analysis. The Pike Trend Analysis for Africa is based on more than 23,000 records of elephant carcasses found at MIC sites between 2003 and 2021. The Pike Trend Analysis shows an increase in levels of illegal killing of elephants from 2003 to 2011 and a downward trend from 2011 to 2021, with the lowest estimate in 2020. The 2021 estimate, while slightly higher, remains within the confidence intervals of the 2020 estimate. Sub-regional variations are observed. In Eastern and Southern Africa, the trend in the last 5 years, from 2017 to 2021, is downward. For 2021, estimated levels of illegal killing are below the average for Africa. Reporting has improved in West Africa since 2019. With a small number of carcasses reported, pike trends are more difficult to determine with a high level of certainty. Estimates show a marginal downward trend in pike from 2017 to 2020 and an increase in 2021. For Central Africa, there is no evidence of a downward trend over the past 5 years. The pike estimate for 2021 remains high, with an average pike estimate above the continental average. While the 2021 pike estimate for the sub-region is higher than the 2020 estimate, it remains within the confidence limits of the 2020 estimate. The level of illegal killing in Asia is estimated based on more than 4,300 records of elephant carcasses found at 30 MIC sites in 13 range states in Asia between 2003 and the end of 2021. Over the past 5 years, from 2017 to 2021, the pike trend has remained relatively constant. Parties should note that the analysis includes elephants killed as a result of human-elephant conflict, and since these killings are also considered as illegal in a large number of range states, the Secretariat continues to assess the information submitted by range states relating to human-elephant conflict. For Africa, parties reported human-elephant conflict in only 4% of the existing records, and the majority were reported as management-related deaths and therefore regarded as legal deaths. In Asia, parties reported human-elephant conflict in only 3% of the records assessed. The majority of these deaths were reported as illegal. The Secretariat will continue to collaborate with participating range states on the reporting of human-elephant conflict-related deaths and with the Mike CITES tag on the refinement of the analysis if required. With regards to factors associated with illegal killing of elephants in Africa, analysis undertaken shows strong evidence that the illegal killing of elephants tends to be lower in countries with better governance, at sites with better law enforcement capacity, and at sites where adjacent households are wealthier and healthier. The Africa-wide annual pike values were strongly associated with the estimated annual trend in the global price of elephant ivory. The findings suggest that addressing system-level challenges, such as corruption, human development in rural areas, and supply to the illegal market and consumer demand, are essential in tackling elephant poaching and the broader illegal wildlife trade. In response to travel constraints associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, the Mike Central Coordination Unit held online meetings with Mike focal points to discuss implementation efforts and provided online training sessions to national and site focal points and patrol team leaders on data collection. A CITES Mike e-learning platform was developed to provide ongoing training for sites that have access to the internet. The Secretariat provides information in the document relating to the continued and expanded efforts to build law enforcement capacity in Mike focal sites, as well as initiatives to provide operations in and around sites in the Mike network. The Secretariat is grateful to the European Union for its multi-year support to the Mike program in Africa since the program's inception. The Secretariat is also grateful for the contributions by USINL, Japan, and GIZ. The tentative budget required to implement and further strengthen the Mike program is contained in CoP19 document 2022 and included in Annex 4 to the present document. Subject to the availability of the substantial external funds required to support the implementation of Mike in the increasing number of Mike sites, the Secretariat will continue to improve, refine, and enhance the Mike program in collaboration with the participating range states and the Mike CITES tag. The Secretariat will furthermore, subject to available funding, continue to report to the Conference of the Parties and the Standing Committee based on the provisions in Resolution Conference 1010, Revision COP18. In conclusion, Chair, the COP is invited to take note of the report.
Thank you, Secretariat. Parties were invited to note the report. I will take some parties. Uganda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Uganda wishes to thank the CITES Secretariat through the Mike program for the comprehensive Mike report in line with the reporting requirements for the Mike program to the regular meetings of the Conference of Parties as contained in Resolution Conf 1010, Rev COP18. We take note of the observed decline in pike levels, particularly in Eastern and Southern Africa, that has been maintained below 0.5, and we congratulate the parties in these sub-regions for their efforts to address illegal killing of elephants. We, of course, remain concerned about the pike levels, particularly in Western Africa and Central Africa, that remain relatively above 0.5, and urge range states in these sub-regions to step up their efforts to address the illegal killing of elephants. Madam Chair, I've had mention of the COVID-19 impact, but Uganda takes note that this report of Mike did not analyze the impacts of COVID-19 on the illegal killing of elephants. It is common knowledge that in most countries in Africa, there was observed increase in some levels of poaching during the pandemic, and it would be important to know how this translated into elephant poaching. However, for Uganda, I wish to report that despite the observed increase in poaching levels during the pandemic, we noted that this was mainly for bushmeat and not necessarily ivory trade as the main driver for the illegal killing of elephants. Nonetheless, we take note of the report and encourage countries involved in the MIC program to continue submitting the elephant carcass data for analysis by the MIC program. And we also urge donors to continue supporting the MIC program. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. Kenya, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Like Uganda, Kenya, we wish to appreciate the efforts of the Secretariat in preparing CoP19 document 65. Madam Chair, we, however, note, and I think in the report, a disclaimer on pike calculation and interpretation in paragraph 12, that pike is an index of poaching pressure and provides trends relating to the levels of poaching. Pike may be affected by several potential biases related to data quality, reporting rate, carcass detection probabilities, variation in natural mortality rates, and other factors, and hence results need to be interpreted with caution. Madam Chair, we take note of this report, and we'll be engaging the CITES, the MIC Secretariat Coordinating Unit to improve on the interpretation of the observed pike levels, because they could vary from one range state to another. Madam Chair, like Uganda, we'll want to appreciate the donors that have continued to provide support to this global monitoring program, because it provides a useful instrument to gauge the impact of any decision that the Conference of Parties take. And we'll want to request for further support to the MIC program in monitoring the illegal killing of elephants and other species. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Kenya. I see Japan, followed by China.
Japan supports the MIC program in cooperation with the Secretariat and partner organizations. As stipulated in paragraph 49 of the report, Japan contributed to the program in Zambia. Moreover, in recent years, Japan contributed in Zimbabwe, Uganda, Mozambique, Rwanda, and in Botswana, in total $4.1 million. Regarding the project of Lower Zambezi National Park in Zambia, referred in the paragraph 49 of the report, though the implementation was delayed due to the pandemic, the project was completed in August, and finally Japan handed the outpost and control gates on September 3rd of this year. We'd like to thank for the efforts of the relevant entities. And Japan is deeply committed to the cause of protecting elephants from the atrocious acts of the poaching, and attaches great importance to supporting range states in the fight against poaching of elephants. Japan will continue to support MIC project. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Japan. China, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. China noticed the report as well as the budget plan for the MIC in the upcoming years. I'm in charge of MIC site in China. Last year in southwest China, a herd of wild elephants made their way north to a big city and then back to the nature reserve. They covered nearly 1,000 kilometers in 3 months. The Chinese government has made great efforts to track, monitor, and protect the whole process to ensure that no human or elephant are injured. This is just one example of China's successful elephant conservation efforts. There has been no illegal elephant killing in China in recent years. We will continue to monitor and protect the elephant, submit mic data in time, and do our best to mitigate human-elephant conflicts. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, China. I will take the United States, followed by India, and then South Africa. United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The United States supports taking note of the report and thanks the Secretariat, Traffic, and the African and Asian elephant range states for their cooperation and efforts to continue the important work of the MIKE program. We have supported the MIKE program since its inception at the COP10. It provides invaluable information on trends in elephant poaching that are directly relevant to the illegal ivory trade. The United States is pleased to be able to financially support this important program. Madam Chair.
Thank you, United States. India.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, we appreciate the efforts of the Secretariat in preparing this report. India has always been supportive of MIKE program, and in the recent past also, we had a close interface with the MIKE. We also appreciate that while analyzing the data, the MIKE has taken into the consideration of the deaths of the elephants and had mentioned that most of the deaths in the country is natural deaths, which are not because of the illegal reasons. However, there is a scope of clarity in the point 31, wherein it is mentioned that the 92% of the records are from MIKE sites in India, which does not actually clarify and leave a scope of interpretation whether all, because since 60% of the Asian elephants are found in India, it needs clarification whether the data from the other sites in Asia is lacking or the entire data which has been taken into the consideration of the analysis is from the India, so that there is no confusion while understanding this analysis which has been mentioned in point number 31. Thank you very much.
Thank you, India. South Africa.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to thank the Secretariat for the report, and we note the content thereof. We would also like to thank the donors of the program and would request their continued support thereof, as this is a very important program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, South Africa. I have one more request for the floor from parties. Burkina Faso, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Le Burkina Faso remercie le secrétariat pour le rapport et pour le programme MIKE. Le programme MIKE a permis de doter certaines aires protégées et des pays de l'aire de répartition des éléphants en logistique pour le suivi des carcasses. Il a aussi permis le renforcement des capacités et des acteurs pour le constat des dégâts causés par des carcasses et pour le suivi écologique. Les résultats de certains pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest sont à relativiser en raison des difficultés sécuritaires qui ont constitué un frein à la collecte des données sur les carcasses. Le Burkina Faso encourage les donateurs à soutenir toujours cet important programme qui permet effectivement de collecter des données et sur les carcasses. Merci. Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Burkina Faso. I'd like to open the floor to observers, if observers would like to make any interventions on this document. Okay, I don't see any observers, so I think we note the report of the mic. Thank you, parties. Thank you, observers. I don't think we have enough time to do CoP19 document 66.6 justice in the 9 minutes that we have remaining. So I will give you a 9-minute early mark tonight. It was my hope to get through it, but we haven't. But thank you very much. You have my gratitude for maintaining quorum until the very last minute. Literally seconds ago, we've lost our quorum, so thank you very much for staying and sticking it out for this very long day. I hope you all enjoy what rest you can get. I will see you all here at 8:45 in the morning. Good night.
Before everyone leaves, please a kind reminder to remember to take your cards. Please remember to take your cards with you. Don't leave them